On October 12, 1967, in the basement archive of the Fabbrica di San Pietro, the Vatican office responsible for St. Peter's Basilica, a structural engineer named Giuseppe Marchetti opened a filing cabinet marked Lavori di Manutenzione, 1870 to 1920. Dust moved through the single overhead bulb's light. The air smelled of ancient paper and limestone dust. He was searching for foundation repair records, routine documentation for the upcoming restoration of the basilica's southern transept. What he found instead were logs, hundreds of pages, bound in leather portfolios, organized by year. Each portfolio contained entries in multiple hands, written in Italian, Latin, and occasionally German. The entries followed a pattern: date, location, structure name, measurements before, measurements after. The measurements were frequencies, hertz values, bell tones. The first portfolio, labeled 1870 to 1872, contained 143 entries. Each entry described modifications to church bells across Italy, France, Austria, Spain. Each modification followed the same pattern. Bells originally ringing at 64, 96, 128 hertz, low, resonant tones, were retuned, recast, or replaced with bells ringing at 256, 384, 512 hertz, exactly double, sometimes quadruple. In the margin of the first page, in faded pencil, Directiva Pio IX, eliminare risonanze basse. Directive from Pius IX, eliminate low resonances. Marchetti photographed 3 pages. The photographs survive in a private collection in Milan. The portfolios were returned to the filing cabinet. No report mentions them in Vatican records. History remembers progress but forgets what it replaced. By the spring of 1871, according to the logs, a pattern had been established. Rain fell in slow drops against the windows of the Palazzo del Sant'Uffizio as engineers compiled lists of churches requiring acoustic correction. The lists were organized by region, then by diocese, then by parish. Northern Italy. 847 churches flagged for modification. France, 1,203 churches. Austria, Hungary, 634 churches. Spain and Portugal, 412 churches. German states, 289 churches. The total exceeded 3,000 structures. The criteria for selection appeared in a separate document, dated March 15, 1871, signed by an official identified only as Ingerbine C. Baldini, consultore tecnico. The document specified churches with bells ringing below 140 hertz, churches with spires exceeding 30 meters in height, churches positioned within 500 meters of other flagged churches. The document noted, concentrations of low-frequency sources create measurable interference patterns. Reduction necessary for public welfare. Public welfare. No other Vatican document from this period uses this phrase in connection with church bells. In a letter discovered in 2003 in the archives of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, a Jesuit astronomer named Angelo Secchi wrote to a colleague in 1872, "I have been consulted regarding acoustic properties of sacred structures. The concern, though not stated explicitly, appears to be the cumulative effect of synchronized low-frequency emissions across urban areas." Secchi continued, "Tests conducted in Rome during Holy Week demonstrated standing wave formation when bells from 17 churches rang simultaneously. The waves were measurable at distances exceeding 2 kilometers. Effects on human subjects included disorientation and nausea." The letter breaks off. The response, if any existed, has not been located. On a cold morning in January 1873, work commenced on the first modifications. Frost coated the scaffolding at Sant'Andrea della Valle in Rome. According to maintenance logs held at the church archives, 2 bells, both dating from 1628, both ringing at 128 hertz, were removed from the tower. The official record states, bells removed for restoration due to cracking. Yet photographs taken before removal, discovered in a Vatican archive in 1998, show no visible cracks. The bell's surfaces are smooth, the bronze intact. The bells were sent to a foundry in Milan. When they returned 6 months later, their pitch had changed. The new frequency, 256 hertz, exactly 1 octave higher. The foundry records, examined by a metallurgist in 1984, show that 340 kilograms of bronze were removed from each bell, material scraped from the interior surface to thin the walls and raise the pitch. In the margin of the foundry invoice, per specifici Vaticani. According to Vatican specifications, across Rome the pattern repeated. In Sant'Ignazio 4 bells retuned. In Santa Maria in Trastevere 3 bells replaced entirely. In San Carlo al Corso, the entire bell tower fitted with dampening chambers. Hollow spaces filled with sand, designed to absorb low-frequency vibration. Heat shimmered above the city in the summer of 1874 when a curious document appeared in the logs. The entry, dated July 23rd, described work at a church whose name had been carefully inked over. Black strokes so thick the underlying text was illegible. The measurements remained visible. Frequenza prima, 64 hertz. Frequenza dopo, 256 hertz. Frequency before, 64 hertz. Frequency after, 256 hertz. Beneath the entry, an unsigned note. Caso speciale. Procedura completata senza approvazione parrocchiale. Special case. Procedure completed without parish approval. No record explains which church or why approval was bypassed. By 1876, the modification program had expanded beyond Italy. In Vienna, logs record work on 14 churches. In Paris, 23. In Barcelona, 8. Each modification followed identical procedures: frequency measurements, bell removal, recasting or dampening installation, frequency verification. The logs specify tolerances. Final frequencies must exceed 240 hertz. Variation not to exceed plus or minus 5 hertz. Low frequency resonance must be eliminated or sufficiently suppressed. The phrase sufficiently suppressed appears 217 times across the logs. No definition of sufficient is provided. In Munich, on a morning in November 1877, workers modifying bells at the Frauenkirche discovered something unexpected. Coal smoke drifted through the tower. Embedded in the wooden beam supporting the largest bell, a bell cast in 1490, ringing at 96 hertz, was a bronze disc, approximately 12 centimeters in diameter. The disc was engraved with concentric grooves and the number sequence 32, 64, 96. According to a letter from the work supervisor to Vatican engineers, dated November 18, 1877, the disc appeared to amplify the bell's lower harmonics. When the bell rang, the disc vibrated in sympathy, sustaining the tone long after the clapper struck. The letter asks, should similar discs be sought in other structures? The response dated December 3rd. Yes, remove all such devices, report findings. Over the following 3 years, the logs record discovery of similar discs in 47 churches across Europe. All were removed. All were sent to Rome. No inventory lists their current location. In a report dated March 1880 held at the Vatican Secret Archives, an engineer identified as P. Moretti summarized the modification program's progress. Total structures modified 2,247. Total bells retuned 4,103. Total resonant discs removed 47. Estimated reduction in aggregate low-frequency emission 73%. The report concludes, remaining concentrations exist in Poland, Ireland, and remote Italian provinces. Recommend continued intervention. The report is signed by 3 officials. 2 signatures are legible: Cardinal Antonelli and Monsignor Bianchi. The 3rd signature has been scraped away, leaving only smooth paper. Meanwhile, in parishes undergoing modification, resistance had begun to surface. Fog pressed against the windows of the Archbishop's residence in Lyon as a petition arrived from 12 parish priests, dated October 1880. The petition complained that new bells lack the depth and gravity of their predecessors, and requested permission to restore original frequencies. The response dated November 1880. Request denied. Modifications made per technical requirements for structural integrity and acoustic health. Acoustic health. The phrase appears nowhere else in ecclesiastical correspondence from this period. In a diary entry from 1881 discovered in 2011, a bell founder in Florence named Carlo Venturi recorded his unease. I have recast 17 bells this year to Vatican specifications. Each time I am instructed to raise the pitch by 1 or 2 octaves. When I inquire as to the reason, I am told only that it is necessary for harmonization. Venturi continued, yet the effect is disharmony. The new bells ring thin and sharp. They cut the air like knives where the old bells embraced it like arms. The churches sound different now, shrill, anxious. The diary was sold at auction in 2012. The buyer's identity was not disclosed. By 1885, the modification program had become systematic enough to require standardization. In a technical manual dated April 1885, archived at the Pontifical Gregorian University, Vatican engineers outlined procedures for acoustic modification of sacred structures. The manual specified bells must be tuned to frequencies above 240 Hz. Spires exceeding 30 meters must be fitted with internal dampening structures. Any discovered resonant devices must be removed and reported. Section 7 of the manual addressed verification procedures. After modification, engineers were to conduct frequency measurements during services, document the absence of low-frequency resonance, and certify that no standing waves form within or between structures. The manual included diagrams showing proper dampening chamber construction, hollow cavities within bell towers, filled with sand or lead shot, positioned to absorb vibrations below 150 Hz. The same 2-to-1 ratio found in London's sealed chambers. The same geometric precision. On a winter morning in 1888, an incident occurred that appeared in no official record, but survived in a letter from a Vatican engineer to his brother. Snow drifted past the windows of Santa Maria Maggiore. The letter, discovered in 2015 in a family estate sale, described an experiment. The engineer, whose name was not preserved in the letter's heading, wrote, "Today we tested the remaining unmodified bells in sequence, 17 churches, all within 2 kilometers. When all rang simultaneously at their original frequencies, 64, 96, 128 Hz, we observed the effect that the directives aim to prevent." He continued, "Standing waves formed in the air itself, visible distortion like heat shimmer. Citizens reported pressure in their skulls, ringing in ears. One woman fainted. The effect persisted for 7 minutes after the bells ceased. The letter concluded, "I understand now why the modifications are necessary, but I wonder what we are erasing." The letter was unsigned. The Vatican Archives contain no record of this test, yet the modifications accelerated. In 1890, logs record 340 churches modified. In 1891, 428. In 1892, 507. The program had become industrial in scale. Teams of engineers traveling across Catholic Europe, armed with tuning forks, acoustic measurement devices, and standardized modification procedures. Shadows lengthened across the Vatican workshops as bronze was melted, recast, tuned. The workshops ran continuously, day and night. Invoices from foundries in Milan, Lyon, Vienna show orders for bell modification per Vatican specifications, totaling thousands of tons of bronze. The cost exceeded 2.3 million lire, an enormous sum for the Vatican's depleted post-unification treasury. Where the funding originated remains unclear. In Vienna, on an autumn evening in 1894, a composer named Anton Bruckner attended Mass at St. Stephen's Cathedral. In a letter to a friend dated October 17th, he described the experience. "The bells have changed. They ring at a different pitch than I remember from my youth. Higher, thinner. The old bells made the cathedral hum, a deep resonance that you felt in your chest. These new bells merely strike the air and vanish." Bruckner continued, "I asked the sacristan when the bells were changed. He said 1892. I asked why. He said he did not know, only that it was done for technical reasons." The letter is held at the Austrian National Library. Bruckner's observations match precisely with modification log entries for St. Stephen's. 4 bells retuned in 1892. Frequencies raised from 96 Hz to 384 Hz. A quadrupling of frequency, a complete elimination of the fundamental tone. By 1900, the modification program had entered its final phase. Air smelled of varnish in the Vatican workshops as engineers compiled comprehensive reports. The logs from this period, discovered partially intact in 1989, show meticulous attention to verification. Each modified church required 3 follow-up inspections over 5 years. Frequencies were remeasured. Any drift back toward lower tones triggered mandatory recalibration. Churches that failed inspection faced additional dampening installation, or, in extreme cases, complete bell replacement. The goal, stated in a directive from 1901, was permanent elimination of resonant coupling between structures. Of the 3,000-plus churches originally flagged, records show modifications completed at 2,847. The remaining structures are either inaccessible, already demolished, or, in a handful of cases, marked exempt with no explanation provided. One exempted church, San Giovanni in Laterano, Rome. Original bells, 64 Hz, 96 Hz, 128 Hz. Status: retain original frequencies, historical preservation. Why this church alone received exemption is not documented. In a photograph from 1903 discovered in 2007, Vatican engineers pose outside a church in Krakow. 12 men in dark suits standing before scaffolding, tools visible in the foreground. The photograph is labeled on the reverse. Zespół Modyfikacji Akustycznych, Polska 1903. Acoustic Modification Team, Poland 1903. The photograph shows men whose names are not recorded. Their work is not celebrated. But the modification logs confirm. In 1903, 34 churches in Poland were modified, 127 bells retuned, frequencies universally raised above 240 Hz. The pattern held. By 1910, the program had achieved what its architects intended. In a confidential report to the Vatican Secretary of State, dated March 1910, an official summarized, "Low-frequency resonance across Catholic churches has been reduced by an estimated 89%. Standing wave formation during synchronized services no longer occurs. Public complaints of acoustic distress have ceased." The report recommended, maintain current frequencies, monitor for unauthorized restorations, discourage historical research into pre-modification acoustic properties. Discourage historical research. The phrase appeared in Vatican directives for decades afterward. In 1914, as Europe descended into war, the modification program quietly ended. The final log entry, dated August 3, 1914, records work at a church in Trieste. The entry is brief. Frequency verification complete. No anomalies detected. Program concludes per directive. No celebration marked the program's conclusion. No public announcement explained what had been done or why. The logs were filed. The workshops closed. The engineers dispersed to other assignments, and across Catholic Europe, church bells rang at frequencies they had never rung before, higher, sharper, stripped of the resonances that had accumulated over centuries. In archives scattered across Europe, fragments of the program survive. In Munich, a foundry record showing 840 kilograms of bronze scraped from 15 bells. In Paris, an invoice for sand used to fill dampening chambers in 7 churches. In Vienna, a photograph of a resonant disc before its removal, concentric grooves visible, numbers engraved, 48, 64, 96. The discs themselves are gone, melted perhaps, stored in a vault whose location is not recorded. Or destroyed entirely, their bronze returned to formless metal. Modern acoustic analysis of churches modified during this period reveals consistent patterns. Bells installed or modified between 1870 to 1920 ring at frequencies averaging 287 Hz, significantly higher than pre-modification averages of 104 Hz. The difference is not subtle. It is transformative. Low frequencies, 64, 96, 128 Hz, produce wavelengths of approximately 5.3, 3.6, and 2.7 meters respectively. In urban areas with churches spaced 300 to 500 meters apart, these wavelengths create interference patterns, zones where waves reinforce, accumulate, persist. High frequencies, 256, 384, 512 Hz, produce wavelengths of 1.3, 0.9, and 0.67 meters. These wavelengths disperse rapidly, create minimal interference, vanish quickly into ambient noise. The modification program did not just change how bells sounded. It changed how sound behaved in the spaces between churches, the cumulative acoustic environment of Catholic cities. It silenced something that had existed for centuries, a network of resonance, unintentional but measurable, connecting churches across urban landscapes through sustained low-frequency vibration. In 2019, researchers at the University of Rome conducted experiments reconstructing the pre-modification acoustic environment. Using historical frequency data from modification logs, they modeled what Rome sounded like in 1869, before the program began. The model predicted standing wave formation in 7 distinct zones across the city, areas where low frequencies from multiple churches converged, reinforced, created measurable pressure variations in air. The researchers noted, the acoustic environment would have been dramatically different, not louder, but denser. Sound would have accumulated rather than dispersed. One researcher added, off record, whether this accumulation was beneficial or harmful, we cannot determine. But someone in 1870 decided it needed to stop. Today, in the Vatican secret archives, the modification logs remain classified under restrictions imposed in 1968, 2 years after Marchetti's discovery. Access requires special permission, rarely granted. Requests to examine the logs are typically denied with the explanation, materials relate to technical maintenance procedures of no historical significance. Yet in 2021, a researcher at the Pontifical Institute gained brief access to one portfolio, the 1870 to 1872 volume. Her notes, published in an obscure Italian journal, describe what Marchetti photographed 50 years earlier. Systematic frequency modifications, resonant disc removals, the directive from Pius IX. Her conclusion: the program represents the most extensive acoustic engineering project in religious history. Its purpose remains unclear. The journal ceased publication the following year. If history is written by survivors, who erased the rest? In Rome today, church bells ring across the city, bright, clear, high-pitched. Tourists record the sound, charmed by the musical quality, unaware that what they hear is not what sounded for centuries before 1870. The bells ring at 256 Hz, 384 Hz, 512 Hz. Frequencies chosen not for beauty but for dispersal, not for resonance but for its absence. In the bell towers, hidden behind decorative paneling, the dampening chambers remain. Hollow voids filled with sand, absorbing vibrations that no longer occur at the frequencies they were designed to suppress. And somewhere in a vault or a file or a forgotten storage room, the modification logs wait, thousands of pages documenting the systematic erasure of resonance across Catholic Europe. The logs contain names of churches, dates of modifications, frequencies before and after. They contain the evidence of what was changed. What they do not contain is why. That answer, if it was ever written down, remains lost, or deliberately withheld, in archives that discourage questions about what the bells once sounded like and what that sound once did. Yes, dear listeners, we've come to the end of another video. I'm continuing my research without slowing down. You can leave any questions or suggestions you have below. Thank you for listening.